We haven't asked this question in a while, but it seems fitting right now.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say this area, from a food or drink standpoint, is really known for? I mean, Chicago, so many other places have their thing.
The
What
staple.
is our staple?
I would say seafood. I mean, we're surrounded by water, and so like growing up on Eastern Shore, I used to go shucking oysters with my dad, and like planting them back in the bay. And so, at the time, I did not eat oysters at all. I hated seafood, honestly. But as I grew up, and had more of an adult palate, I was like, you know what, it's actually not that bad. But
Hmm.
seafood. There's also this drink called the Crush. I guess it might be a
Yeah,
Virginia Beach standard with the Crush Ice.
okay.
So that's the I feel like
The
that's the
orange
standard
crush from
here.
Waterman's.
Maybe
Yes.
that is like the staple of the area, the Orange Crush.
Yeah,
Maybe that's it. I mean, wow, after all this time, we finally figured it out.
I know, and it wasn't until just now asking Travis a question, I'm like, man, maybe the Orange Crush, that has some legs, because we have some. It's spring break right now, and so there's a lot of people that we know that are in Virginia Beach from either the New York area or from the Michigan area, and people.
Hmm.
So like they'll push it on Facebook or whatever. Hey, what should we do? And we're like, you got to hit Waterman's and get a crush at least once
Yes.
before you leave.
The problem with an Orange Crush
There
has
is no
nothing to do
problem.
with the taste. No, there's nothing the matter. Okay, you're right. I just need to say this. They are so lethal that you can drink
Yes.
so many of them and have no clue, number one, how many you've had or what it's doing to you, because it's just like you don't taste the alcohol. It is.
Yeah.
I remember I've only been to that place, Waterman's, once and had those drinks, and it was at a reception for a wedding. Oh, so maybe that's it. The Orange Crush. Because some people say the white sauce at Mexican, because that's really only a thing here, which is weird because I would have thought it was in Northern Virginia, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And seafood comes up, but I think seafood's too broad, maybe. But so you said oysters.
What about the like fried soft shell crabs? I like talked to a lot of friends when I used to live in New York, and they were like, "What's that?" I was like, "You never had like a fried soft shell crab?" And they're like, "No." I think that might be a
I have a
Virginia thing
seafood
too.
allergy, so I can't eat seafood.
Oh,
It's unfortunate. But I'm going to take your word for it and say, hey,
Yeah, I just,
Southern
and the
California.
reason that I'm interested is I like another opinion, but
Yeah.
two, it's just like, how can we put something on the map to really market this area because I'm just curious everyone's input, what their opinion is.
Well, like the Bahamas has like that dark and stormy, or maybe it was Bermuda. You got New
Mhm.
Orleans. There's a special drink there, so maybe there is
The
something.
hurricane, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe there is something like that.
I don't know if the Manhattan actually originated in Manhattan, but there's that.
That is interesting. I've never had a Manhattan, but it's like been on my list of things to do. But every time I go to a restaurant, I'm like, this place isn't bougie enough for me to like try one of these. Like I need it to be at a place that's going to make this like decent. But soon I will. Because I want to get into whiskey. I feel like it feels like a thing that would be fun to do. Tim, do you hate whiskey?
I don't know enough about it, so I would feel really, really bad. I mean, people invite me to go to different things, and I'm like, I'm just going to waste your money. I'm going to waste your whiskey because I don't really know what I'm doing. So, yeah, I don't have a palate that is designed for that. I need like a whiskey 101, a bourbon 101, and just really start from the bottom and work my way up.
Started from the bottom. Now we're here. All right.
Yeah. But you've been to some really cool places. What brought you back to the 757?
Yeah, so I was living in New York. So after I left Chicago, I moved to New York City. I was working, I guess, throughout the education sector. At first, at this ed tech startup in Newark, and then at the New York City Department of Education. But really brought me home was the pandemic. So I was there March 2020. So we got the first wave of everything, and then ended up contracting coronavirus. Lost my sense of taste and smell, which to this day, I don't know if it's long COVID or not, I still can't smell or taste at the level that used to be.
Early on, you got it.
Yeah, like I think it was like maybe end of March, early April of 2020.
Oh wow!
So that was a dark time because we were like, oh, like what does this mean? Am I gonna die?
Yeah.
Which was like jokingly, it was like kind of a thing because we didn't know at the time that was actually a symptom, and so it was different for sure. And so then New York became like, like most of the world, and like a desert island almost. It was just like nothing was happening. And then, I had a lot of friends who like were moving and going back home. And, for me, I had forgot that actually home was an option. And so I spoke to my mom. She's like, you can always move back home. And I'm like, you know what? I can't always move back home. And so October, I was like, I'm going to move home. And I did. And the goal was to stay for 3 months. And I was going to like get my own apartment back in Brooklyn in January. And then at the time, our work remote policy was extended to June, and I stayed to June. And then at that time, it didn't make sense to like leave. So I kind of grown accustomed to being back home. So
is home the Eastern Shore at that point, or is it somewhere else?
So home is Eastern Shore, but like my parents live in Chesapeake, but I have a ton of family that's still on Eastern Shore.
Got it.
So that time with the ed tech startup, is that what where you first got your taste of startup land, and what drew you to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So I was working at this organization called Brick Academy in Newark, and so they were a school management organization. So they essentially managed 2 public schools, and my role was the director of instructional strategy, and I was really tasked with leading a lot of the kind of online learning platforms. And so we were working with like a lot of ed tech companies to do some of that kind of initial analysis. And so we implemented a few different systems. And so I was helping teachers to like really utilize the platform while also kind of building out dashboards to like make data more actionable for them. And so that was definitely my first taste of startup life. And it was interesting, to say the least. It's not for everyone, I will say that. But
what was interesting about it?
Just, for me, coming from corporate America, right, where there, JP Morgan, where there's all the departments, all the folks who work on different things, right, and then being maybe a team of 5 when it's just like, everyone has to wear many different hats. And so it was interesting in the sense that like I was hired to do one job, but then, I was then pulled to do many other things that was not in my JD, but it was part of like the culture, right, to be super collaborative and to like, really pull your sleeves up and just, go all hands in. So
how do you learn that skill of, I don't even know if it's a skill, but like I think we're taught, and maybe it's changed, but we're taught this is the process. Go work this thing, and then you're going to work at this company. And it's going to look like this, and your role is this. But now there's this other aspect. Not that startups haven't been around forever, but now it's it's cool to work at a startup where you don't necessarily know your duty or your role at the company or something like that. Like, is that just something that you just have to roll with the punches? Like, because I can just think of like probably even myself saying this way back when, like, that's not my job. I'm not going to do that. When I worked in, a corporate job, why would I do that? I'm not doing that. But now we're in this other business world where it's like, no, that's absolutely what you do. You don't really know your roles. Is that something that you learn? How do you process that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was definitely a struggle initially, but I think for the most part, you have to really buy into the company's mission. So if you're buying into the company's mission, then of course you want to help out and see the company succeed and grow. And so for me, we were really trying to, ensure that all students had a shot at a fair education. So it resonated with me in that aspect, that I wanted to do a good job, and like where I could actually, lend my talents, I could, be helpful. So I did that.
So you didn't care that much about the banking industry, but the other aspect. So it matters kind of what the business is.
Yeah, banking felt, particularly at JP Morgan, like we were just helping rich people get richer. And I was just like, I can really take my talents elsewhere and like help, do some more social good, right? And feel like I'm actually, leaving the world better than I left it. And so that was my whole mission of like making the pivot into education, was like I wanted to do some social good.
Yeah. And with regards to that, where or when, or was there a specific thing that happened within your life that moved you towards the DE&I space, that you're like, this is something I need to get involved in. This is a calling. What drew you to that area specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there wasn't like a particular experience or like singular like event that happened. I think, for me, I'm a product of public education. At the time, Kip the Peak School Elementary, shout out to Kip the Peak, was a Blue Ribbon School of Excellence. And so I was able to like take part in all the different like activities and programs I had at the school, and also had teachers that actually cared about doing their job. And so for me, I think I was like living in Chicago at the time, or maybe New York. I have read a report about the school and how it actually became one of the lowest performing schools in the state of Virginia. And so that for me was like, well, how can I actually ensure that, folks who look like me have a shot at a decent education? And so that was kind of what made me realize to make the pivot into education, is because I was, considered to be one of the lucky ones, right? I made it out, quote unquote, or like of the country, right? But what made me so different, right? How come, or how can everyone actually have this opportunity? And so that was really the catalyst that, had me make the switch to education.
Do you notice that while it's happening? Like growing up, did you notice that, or did it take the report to actually see that? Because I'm always interested. Like, obviously, it's on the front page of everything now, where it's very like it's in a very good spot from a branding perspective. Like, hey, this is a thing. But like when growing up or going through that, did you realize it, or did you have to have someone explain it to you? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, we're all naive, right? We're all young. And so like I feel like, these shows was like diverse in the sense of like it being like the population that it reflects. Whereas when I went to Chicago and New York City, there were students who only went to school with their own race, right? So I had white friends that were like, oh, I only went to school with white people, or like black friends, like, yeah, I've never actually interacted with like people who were not black until I got to college. And I was just like, really? Like, is that a thing? And I'm thinking like, this is Chicago and New York City, but like, how can folks, these are the progressive beacons of the world, right? Not be able to interact with people outside of their race until they get to college. And so that was kind of like the aha moment. It's like, oh, so everyone did not have the same experience as I did. And so for me, it was kind of that moment where I looked at my life like, wow, I'm actually pretty lucky to have a different experience and have somewhat of a diverse kind of eclectic group of friends that I've actually kind of, I still keep in touch with.
So intentionally siloed in those cases, I guess is what you're saying, that groups of students were one race to another, and that was the norm until they got to.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it was intentionally siloed from their perspective. It was more so like, because of segregation and the way that like school systems are set up, right? Particularly New York City is one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And you would think a city like New York City would have a better grapple of like how they would be able to do that, but not so much, right? So if you live in a certain neighborhood zip code, everyone that looks like kind of stays within their own groups. And so they tend to then go to schools with folks who look like them. And so there was a big push when I joined the DOE to like think through how do we actually think about desegregating schools in the 21st century, right? And, there's been a shit ton of articles of folks who are, for it and against it. And this new buzzword kind of way. But, equity, right? And when you think about it, is like, how do we then take our resources that are like, limited, right? There's this zero-sum game when it comes to education. But how are we like divvying that up to folks who might be more deserving or need a little extra effort to ensure that they're kind of meeting the mark? But I digress from that point.
Well, no, it's really fascinating to me because it seems like every show we get off into running or some kind. But but one of the things about the New York City Marathon that is really unique is that you go through all the different neighborhoods, the different ethnic neighborhoods as you're traveling through New York City. And I never really thought about it until you just mentioned it now, that probably each of Little Italy and Chinatown and all of that, they probably have their own schools that for that particular neighborhood. So I've never really thought about it from that standpoint. It's fascinating.
And New York City's school system is like probably the most complicated in the nation, right? Because they have 1.1 million students that are like actually from K to 12. Mostly K to 5 or primary education is kind of regulated to like neighborhoods. Whereas middle schools, you can attend middle school in your borough likely. And then for high school, it's open enrollment. So if you live in the Bronx, and you want to attend a school in the Queens, you can, but you have to go through this application process, which I was like completely floored. I was like, so you mean to tell me I'm an 8th grader, I'm applying to up to 12 high schools and I have to like be selected based off of like, location and geography. So it's a complete burden for parents and families to figure out how to navigate that. And so part of my role at the DOE and the Office of Student Enrollment was to kind of think through like, how do we make the enrollment process easier for families to like navigate they used to call the high school directory the Bible or the phone book, right? Because it literally was the size of a phone book of like over 680 schools that you can apply to in high school, right? And so if I'm a family with limited resources, or I'm a working mom who is single, and like, how am I able to navigate that on my own? Whereas, there's another family who may be more fluent, who come from a 2-parent household, may have other help that can actually take the time out to help them navigate the system. And so we did a few different things to kind of combat that. But overall, I think that, New York City still offers some of the top schools in the country. And so my role was trying to think through like, how do we ensure that like everyone, regardless of race, background, income, socioeconomic status, has a chance to be able to attend those schools.
Interesting. With that.